Today, Iran announced it plans to stop complying with portions of the nuclear deal it signed with Western powers in 2015. Iran stopped short of withdrawing from the deal altogether. But as Nick Schifrin reports, the announcement increases already escalating tensions with the United States.
The Iran deal made a fundamental trade. Iran restricted its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. 1 year ago today, the Trump administration withdrew from the deal and has since reimposed sanctions. For the last year, Iran complied with the deal. But today, Iran said it would not abide by all the deal's restrictions. Number one, the deal limits Iran's stockpiles of low-enriched uranium, which is nuclear fuel, and heavy water, which is used to operate a nuclear reactor. Today, Iran said it would no longer adhere to those limits. And if Iran does exceed the caps, it will no longer be in compliance with the deal. And then Iran threatened even more dramatic actions. To produce a bomb, you typically need to enrich uranium at 90%. Before the deal, Iran enriched uranium at nearly 20%, which the U.S. said meant Iran could break out and create a bomb within a few months. After the deal, Iran enriched uranium at 3.67% and removed most of its centrifuges, moving breakout time to more than a year. Today, Iran said if it doesn't receive economic benefits allowed by the deal in the next 60 days, it would not adhere to, quote, any uranium enrichment limit. And it would also take a plan to convert the Arak nuclear reactor so it doesn't produce large amounts of plutonium and cancel it. Despite those threats, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said today Iran was still in the deal.
Our nation should know that we have not withdrawn from the nuclear deal. They should not think that the nuclear deal does not exist anymore. Today we announced a reduction, not withdrawal.
And for more on this, we turn to Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Majid Takht Rabanchi. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining the NewsHour today. You've gone a whole year since the Trump administration pulled out of the Iran deal without responding in a major way. Why respond today?
Over the last year, we exercised extreme patience in order to show that Iran is ready. Iran is ready to take extra mile in order to show that it is sincere in its implementation of the nuclear deal. But unfortunately, due to U.S. bullying of even its closest allies, we have not received the economic benefit that we were promised to receive based on the nuclear deal. And then we were left with no other option than to say that for 60 days, we are going to stop implementing or to cease performance of some of our obligations, voluntary obligations based on the nuclear deal, and we will see what will happen during the next 60 days. The window of diplomacy is not closed. We believe that Iran will speak, will negotiate with the partners, the remaining participants of the JCPOA, and we will see what will be the outcome of the negotiations.
Ambassador, you say that you were left with no other option. But why do you need to enrich uranium at a higher level than 3.67%? What's your intentions by doing that, or possibly doing that?
Well, no, for the time being, we are adhering to the JCPOA on the limit of the enrichment, the level of enrichment. What we have said is that for the next 60 days, we are going just to be free for our stockpile. We are not talking about enriching more than 3.67% for the next 60 days.
Right, but President Rouhani did say today that you would enrich higher than 3.67 if you don't get those economic incentives, which haven't come so far.
Of course we will. Of course we will. The reason is that our partners have had more than enough time for the last year and a half or so to compensate what the Americans have done to the JCPOA. So if they cannot do it in the next 2 months, that means that the political will is not there, and then we will act in accordance with our national interest.
Today, President Trump said that he still hoped to meet with Iran's leadership. Does Iran have any interest in meeting with President Trump?
There is no utility in meeting somebody who carelessly tear apart, an international agreement. It was not an agreement between Iran and the United States. Other countries, the European Union were part of it. So all of a sudden we see that the president comes and say, I don't like it because of so many reasons, because the former president took the initiative to sign such an agreement with Iran. So how can we trust somebody who carelessly and recklessly do something like this?
Ambassador, quickly in the time we have left, there are some people who I'm talking to here who are experts on Iran fear that the speech by President Rouhani today will allow hardliners here in the U.S. and perhaps Israel a stronger case to argue that Iran is not trustworthy. What's your response to that?
I think the hardliners, as our foreign minister has coined it, 4Bs, Bibi Netanyahu, Bolton, Ben Zayed and Ben Salman, they are doing whatever they can, no matter what Iran does. So it doesn't matter how we are dealing with JCPOA. Their agenda is to provoke. Their agenda is to agitate the situation. Their agenda is to prepare a war against Iran. We are not trying to wage war against anybody, but definitely we will defend ourselves no matter what.
Ambassador Majid Rabanchi, Ambassador of Iran to the United Nations, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
And now with me for the Trump administration's view is Brian Hook, the State Department Special Representative for Iran. Brian Hook, thank you for coming back to the NewsHour. You just heard Ambassador Rabanchi accuse the U.S. of saying that your real intention is to provoke Iran and to, quote, prepare for war. Is that the U.S. intention?
I didn't really hear what he said. I can just say that today what we saw with the Iranian regime is another example of nuclear blackmail. This is a strategy that they've used very effectively for many years. They do it to intimidate other nations so that they then give Iran the economic benefits that that they think they deserve. And in fact, Iran does not need to be enriching any fissile material at a level that is above what is required for a peaceful nuclear program. And so we're very happy to be outside of the Iran nuclear deal. We have a lot more freedom to deter Iran and prevent it from ever acquiring a nuclear weapon.
So you call it nuclear blackmail. Let me go into what President Rouhani said today. He said that Iran would no longer abide by the caps on heavy water and low-enriched uranium. He threatened in 60 days to do more when it came to enrichment, but they are in the deal. And as you heard the ambassador say, diplomacy is still an option. So, in some ways, is their response restrained?
No, I think, as I said earlier, I think this is the Iranian regime, the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, threatening to enrich levels of uranium beyond what is necessary for a peaceful nuclear program. They have also used the nuclear program as cover to expand their range of activities to run an expansionist revolutionary foreign policy around the Middle East. And it runs all the way from Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen. And so what we've done outside of the deal is to drive up the costs of Iran's very expansionist foreign policy, and also being outside of the deal with the enormous economic pressure that we're able to put on this regime, we're in a much better position to achieve our national security goals outside of the deal.
I think your critics would point out that it would be easier to confront Iranian malign behavior while restricting their nuclear program.
Well, Iran is still in the Iran nuclear deal. We're outside of it, and so we're not under any of those restrictions any longer. When we were in the deal, we weren't able to use any of our oil and banking sanctions against Iran to change their malign behavior around the Middle East. We've now sanctioned almost 1,000 Iranian individuals and organizations for a range of activities around the nuclear program, the missile program, the regional aggression, and the arbitrary detention of American citizens. We are seeing a difference. Iran has had to cut its defense budget for 2 successive years. Its biggest client in the Middle East, Hezbollah, has been making a public appeal for donations because the money from Iran is running out. So we're very happy with the positive impact that we're having just in the 1 year, and today is the 1-year anniversary of us getting out of the Iran deal.
Brian Hook, we've got about a minute left, so I want to ask you about that maximum pressure campaign. You just talked about almost 1,000 people or entities. Today, you announced new sanctions on Iranian steel, aluminum, and copper. One of the goals that you and I have talked about is getting Iran back to the table to renegotiate what you've called a bigger nuclear deal. Is there any evidence that your maximum pressure campaign is convincing Iran to come back to the table?
Well, we have a goal of getting to a new and better deal to succeed the existing Iran nuclear deal, which is only limited to the nuclear program. We are interested in an agreement that would address the nuclear program, the missile program, regional aggression, human rights abuses, and the like. Secretary Pompeo made that very clear about a year ago. What the kind of demands that we have placed on the Islamic Republic to behave more like a normal nation and less like a revolutionary cause. Putting in place that sort of clarity, we think has been very helpful for the international community, and it's highlighted Iran's regional aggression, and we're having more countries come our way over the last year because of our diplomacy.
Brian Hook, Special Representative for Iran at the U.S. State Department. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick.
We now turn to Ambassador Wendy Sherman. She was the lead U.S. negotiator for the nuclear agreement with Iran during the Obama administration, and she's now a senior fellow at the Belfer Center at Harvard. You heard me ask Brian Hook whether the U.S. intention is to provoke Iran, is to wage war, which is what we heard from the Iranian ambassador. Do you believe the U.S. intention is to provoke Iran?
Well, I hope that the U.S. intention is not to provoke Iran to leave the deal or to provoke Iran into a regional conflict. Indeed, I think that President Rouhani very carefully threaded the needle today, not leaving the deal, but beginning to take steps to say, please, let's not escalate this situation. I wish the Trump administration were as measured in its approach. And I would say to Brian Hook and to the Trump administration, what have they gotten as a result of withdrawing from this deal a year ago? There is more malign behavior in the Middle East, not less. Americans are still in prison and missing in Iran. The Iranian people do not have more freedom, and the administration has set Iran back on a path to perhaps working to obtain nuclear weapons, exactly what we stopped from happening. So
you just said the U.S. has led Iran onto that path, but as I asked the ambassador, why should Iran enrich more than 3.67? What's wrong with where they are right now, and why isn't that criticism valid?
Iran is very happy to stay at 3.67% in its enrichment of uranium if, indeed, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal, stays in place. And those limitations are for quite some time. And it is all about...
Although, as you know, your critics say not
Yes,
long enough.
I know they say it's not forever. It is least solid for 15 years that you cannot go above a certain stockpile limit. You can't go above 3.67%. But even after that, there are limitations on what Iran can do. And there is the most extensive monitoring and inspection of Iran of any country in the world.
Iran said, as you heard the ambassador, that we will enrich beyond 3.67 if we don't get the incentives that the JCPOA, that the Iran deal intended for Iran to get. The Europeans would be the ones to help deliver that. Can they deliver the incentives economically to keep Iran within this deal?
I think it's very tough because, as I think you know quite well, the U.S. secondary economic sanctions, which say that if you deal with the Central Bank of Iran, you can't deal with an American bank, are incredibly powerful because, quite frankly, virtually every company in the world would choose an American bank over the Central Bank of Iran. And when you marry that with the oil sanctions, that with the administration trying to go to zero exports allowed around the world, they're very powerful sanctions. The U.S. has to be careful in what it does, though. If we use these sanctions too much, people will begin to say that we should no longer have the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. The other thing I'd point out, Nick, is, in my view, there are tactics here, but no strategy, and certainly no consistent strategy. If we take a look at North Korea, if we take a look at Venezuela, if we take a look at how we're dealing with the Chinese and the Uyghurs, we see a very different set of standards.
The U.S. earlier this week deployed a carrier group to the Middle East, as well as a bomber squadron, in response to intelligence, according to the officials that I spoke to, in which Iran was planning to target U.S. troops and also target U.S. allies, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Doesn't that show that the Iran deal didn't improve Iranian behavior?
We never said that it would improve Iranian behavior in the region. What we did say is that we needed to get the nuclear weapon off the table so it would not deter our actions and our partners and our allies' actions in the region. And we could then use all of the sanctions that we still had on Iran to press them to the table to deal with their malign behavior, the state sponsorship of terrorism, their human rights abuses, and their keeping Americans in prison and not bringing back missing Americans to our home.
Very quickly, I only have a few seconds left. Iran's strategy seems to be waiting out the Trump administration. If a Democrat is elected in 2020, should he or she rejoin the deal and or try and expand it?
I think every Democratic candidate that I've heard have said that they would immediately rejoin the deal. But like in any arms control negotiation, you usually have a follow-on agreement.
Wendy Sherman, lead U.S. negotiator for the Iran deal.
Thank you.